Hello, Pat Ryan again, and I'm here to tell you another story. Now, this story I learned a long time ago when I was a student at college, and I heard it from a friend of mine who came from Cork. And the story goes like this. A long time ago, when my Aunt Jane was a wee little girl, she decided to go off and seek her fortune. She thought she was big enough and brave enough and clever enough and strong enough to go out and get a job. So that's what she did. She headed out and went down into town on the market day. Now, on market day, there was a place called the hiring fair. And Jane went there to get a job because in those days, if you wanted a job, you'd go to the hiring fair on market day and you'd stand there with other people waiting to get some work. And people who needed a worker, they'd come to the hiring fair and they'd look at the people there and they'd choose the one who looked best for whatever job they had, whether it was cooking meals or tidying up the house or doing work on the farm. So that's how people got jobs. And Jane went there to the hiring fair and waited all day for someone to give her a job. But nobody did. I think she was just too wee a girl. They didn't think she was big enough or strong enough or clever enough to do proper work. Well, the day was coming to an end. The market was closing down, and it looked like the hiring fair was over, and nobody had offered Jane a job. She was very disappointed. And just as she was about to give up and go home, an old man came up to her. Oh, he was very old. He had a baldy head and a long white beard that touched the ground. But he was very, very small. He only came up to my Aunt Jane's elbow, and she was just a little girl. But the old man looked Jane up, down, and all around. And he said, "You'll do. Come with me. I need someone to keep my house and cook my meals. So if you want the work, you can have it." Well, nobody else had offered Jane any work, so she agreed to take the job and went off with the old fella. They hadn't walked very far down the road when the old man said to her, "Now then, if you're to work for me, you must call everything by its proper name. Now, look at me. Take me, for instance. What would you call me?" And Jane thought for a bit, and she said, "Well, I'll call you Master, or Mister, whatever you please, sir." And the old man said, "No, no, no. I am Don Nippery Scepter, the master of all masters, so don't you forget it." Well, Jane said she wouldn't, and off she went with Don Nippery Scepter, the master of all masters. They walked along the road until it came into the forest, and there in the middle of the woods they came to a lovely wee cottage, a little house with a thatched roof. And the old man looked at the cottage with pride, and he pointed to it and said, "There now, what do you call that there? That's where we're going to live. That's where you're going to work." And Jane thought, and she said, "Well, I'll call it the cottage, or the house, whatever you please, sir." And the old man said, "No, no, no." He said, "That is the great castle of Strawbungle, and don't you forget it." Jane said she wouldn't. Into the great castle of Strawbungle they went. Now, in the great castle of Strawbungle there was a kitchen, and in the kitchen there was a fireplace, and in the fireplace there was a fire, a big, hot, roaring, raging red fire. And the old man pointed to the fire, and he said, "What do you call that there? That's what you'll use to do the cooking." And Jane looked, and she said, "Well, I'll call it the fire, or the heat, whatever you please, sir." And the old man said, "No, no, no." He said, "That is hot cockalorum, and don't forget it." Jane said she wouldn't. Now, next to the hot cockalorum, there was a pail of water, and the old man went up to the bucket, and he pointed to it and said, "Now, what's that in there?" And Jane looked, and she said, "Well, I'll call it the water, or the wet, whatever you please, sir." And the old man said, "No, no, no, that is pondalorum, and don't forget it." Jane said she wouldn't. Now, next to the pondalorum, lying there on the floor, was a lovely little pussy cat. Oh, one of those cats, all black fur with a white patch of fur on the face, And Don Nippery Scepter, he went up to the cat and he scratched the cat's ears and tickled the cat's chin, and he said, "What do you call the creature here?" And Jane looked, and she went up and she tickled the cat's tum, and she said, "Well, I'll call her the cat, or the kitty, whatever you please, sir. And the old man said, No, no, no. That is the white-faced simony, and don't forget it. Well, Jane said she wouldn't. Well, then the white-faced simony jumped up and ran across the room and ran up the stairs to the rest of the house. So the old man, he pointed at the stairs, and he said, What do you call those there? And Jane said, Well, I'll call 'em the stairs, or the steps, whatever you please, sir. And the old man said, No, 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 that is the wooden hill, and don't forget it. And Jane said she wouldn't. And up the wooden hill they went. Now at the top of the wooden hill was a wee room, and in the wee room there was a wee bed. And the man pointed to the bed and said, Now what's that there? That's where I sleep. And Jane said, Well, I'd call it your bed, or your cot, whatever you please, sir. And the old man said, No, 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 that is my barnacle, and don't forget it. Jane said she wouldn't. Then the old man pointed to the trousers he wore, and he said, What do you call these things on my legs? And Jane said, Well, I'd call them your trousers, or your breeches, whatever you please, sir. And the old man said, No, no, no. He said, These are my fortune's crackers, and don't forget it. Well, Jane said she wouldn't. And then he pointed to the shoes on his feet, and he said, What do you call these here on my feet? And Jane looked. And she said, Well, I'd call them your shoes, or your brogues, whatever you please, sir. And the old man said, No, no, no. Those are my hay-down treaders, and don't forget it. Well, Jane said she wouldn't. Then the old man looked Jane up, down, and all around. He said, Now, I've taught you everything by the proper name. If you're a good child, you work hard, you tidy up my house nice, you cook my meals proper, but most important, you remember every word I've taught you, I will reward you. I will pay you with all the gold and all the silver that you can carry. However, said the old man, if you don't clean my house the way I like it, and if you don't cook food that I find tasty, well, and worst of all, if you forget one single word I've taught, I'll have to punish you. I'll whack you with a broomstick and give you nothing but bread and water. Well, Jane said she would do the best she could. And off she went, tidied up the house, then cooked a meal for the fella, and they sat down to eat their supper, and it was all grand. And then the old man said good night, and he went up to his bed. And Jane went to sleep where all servants had to sleep in those days, on the floor in the kitchen by the fire to keep warm. Well, she settled down after a hard day, and she was all ready to go to sleep, but she barely got a wink of it that night. For that night, while she slept, a terrible thing happened. You know the black cat with the white patch on the face? Well, that cat fell asleep too close to the fire. And so the cat's tail caught on fire. And so Jane woke to the most horrible sound. The cat was yowling and howling and yowling and running all around the house with a great big flame shooting off the end of her tail. Well, Jane could see that the cat was like a runaway matchstick, and the cat was going to set the whole house on fire. So quick as a wink, Jane jumped up onto her feet and she shouted out loudly, Don Nipri Scepter, master of all masters, get up, get up, get up, get out of your barnacle and put on your fortune's crackers and your hay-down treaders, and you run down that wooden hill as fast as you can. For the white-faced simony has a bit of hot cockalorum on her tail, and if you don't go fetch pondalorum and pour the pondalorum all over the white-faced simony, soon the whole great castle is straw bungle. It's going to be on hot cockalorum. Well, the old man heard her cry. He jumped out of his bed, put on his trousers and shoes, ran down the stairs, fetched the water, poured the water over the cat, and put out the fire. And so the house was saved from burning down. And the very next morning, because Aunt Jane had done such good work the night before and remembered all the words and so saved the house from burning down, the old man paid her right off. He gave her all the gold and all the silver that she could carry, which was a good fair bit, because even though she was a wee little girl, old Jane was a strong one, And she carried away enough gold and silver that day that she never ever again had to work a day in her life. And that was good. And that's the story of the master of all masters. Now, I hope you liked that story. I wonder if you're as clever as Aunt Jane. Could you remember all the words that the old man taught her? I bet you could. You know, the stairs were the wooden hill, because they go up and down like a hill does. And the barnacle, that was the bed. I always remember that because it begins with a B, like bed does. And the hay down treaders were his shoes. And, you know, you tread, that means you step on something. So, hay down treaders. I remember the shoes that way. And the fortune's crackers were their trousers. It'd be funny if you had firecrackers going off in your pockets, wouldn't it? So I remember that. And then the white-faced simile was the cat because it had the white patch on the face. And the fire was cockalorum. And I think of fire, well, some people make fire by burning coal and it's hot, so hot cockalorum. And the water was pondalorum. Well, a pond is, you know, a small lake, a pool of water. And then the house was the great castle Straubungo. Well, really, it was a cottage. That's kind of the smallest house you can get. And a castle would be a great big place to live. So it's kind of an opposite. I remember it that way. And Don Preceptor, we called himself the master of all masters as well, didn't he? So that's how I remember the words when I tell the story. But you could have fun if you can remember the words. You could say to your sisters or your brothers or your mum or dad, you could say, well, I'm going up the wooden hill to sleep in my barnacle. Or you could say, well, I'm going to go change my fortune's crackers and my hay down treaders. Or you could say, I'm going to go play with the white-faced simony. Or you could say, hey, Mom, it's cold today. Can we have the hot cockalorum on? Or you could say, oh, I'm thirsty. Could I have a drink of pondalorum? And you know, if you did that, your brothers and sisters and your mother and father might think you've gone crazy. But that would be fun, wouldn't it? Anyway, I hope you liked that story. And there'll be a lot more stories coming. So stay with us and we'll tell you some more. Bye-bye.